It is NFL draft week, and people are excited about individual players. People are excited to find out the landing spots for these names. Shawn, we've talked about it for weeks and weeks. I've basically had my intro for a lot of these shows. We like the draft is almost here. It's going to be here soon. Well, the draft is pretty much here. We are ready for it in less than basically 4 days. We're going to find out where a lot of these players are going to be situated moving forward in their NFL careers, and that is hugely exciting. There's also a couple of players that, when we put out the notice, if you have any questions for future shows, let us know what they are. When a lot of them questions are about one specific player who we're getting more clarity, but we weren't certain what side of the ball they would be playing more on. Come in, I think we'll have to discuss one Travis Hunter on today's show. But Shawn, NFL draft week, how hyped are you? I know it's always the best time of the year here on RotoViz OT, but finding to get to open up those draft cards and know where the hand is dealt at the end of this week is pretty exciting on the calendar.
Yeah, I mean, if there's something more exciting than week 17 and finding out which leagues you're going to win, if you got a shot at a tournament, all of those types of things, it's this Thursday and Friday. Maybe you could even say Saturday, because some of our favorites are going to go on day 3, and we're hoping they go to a good spot to redeem a little bit of that value that we hope they would have. And Colm, this stretches across so many different sort of subdomains within football, where we have so much excitement for the landing spots. In fantasy, most of us have favorite NFL teams that we grew up rooting for. You really want the key guys to land on one of those teams. It doesn't matter if your team is drafting number 1, drafting number 32 in the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, you're hoping that they add a difference maker, right? You're thinking they're one player away. Even in, unfortunately for Chiefs fans who didn't quite get the three-peat to separate their team out as sort of the all-time best. You're certainly looking at Kansas City in that Super Bowl and saying, I don't even know if they're one player away, but you want that one player, if that is the truth, to be drafted there in the first round. I mean, Thursday, what a party. And then Friday, Colm, we get to see where most of these fantasy relevant guys go. I'm pretty fired up.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. And Shawn, the thing about the draft is, we're at this point of the season, everyone's 0-0 in terms of win-loss record. But, drafts can change the trajectory of a franchise dramatically. We look back to last year, for example, and how quick Jaden Daniels has changed people's thoughts around the Washington Commanders. And it may not be a quarterback, but some of the players in this draft are going to end up, heading on to Canton for one of those gold jackets. And it's always exciting that it could be the player landing on your team. The optimism can be very, very high at this particular point. I kicked off the show by teasing a little bit about Travis Hunter and what his outlook's going. We're maybe at the end of the show going to talk a little bit about rookie drafts, because we have some people with questions about what if your draft is pre-NFL draft. We have a couple of people with questions with drafts that are kicking off on a Wednesday pre the NFL draft, so we may get to that time allowing. But just before we start recording, Shawn, there has been rumors and rumblings. I know you have your updated 4-round rookie mock draft coming out in the next couple of days. By the time the NFL draft comes around, it'll certainly be up on rotoviz.com. But one of the players that has moved up for you is Travis Hunter, and you mentioned in that it's getting clearer day by day that if he lands in Cleveland, the enthusiasm is that he will play certainly on both sides of the ball. But before we recorded today, Daniel Jeremiah, who is usually pretty in tune with this sort of information, quite confidently talking about the fact that he expects him to be primarily an offensive piece and maybe play some defense, but to be out there more on offense rather than on the defensive side, being taken by the Cleveland Browns at number 2. They'll pair him up with Jerry Jeudy. Obviously, there's quarterback issues to deal with in Cleveland as well. But if we have been looking at this all along, that he plays, let's say, 50-50, or it's a split, or he's more on the defensive side, we are 3 days away from the NFL draft, and it appears that at this point, with Daniel Jeremiah's reporting that we may be more in a 75-25 split. Where does that change the dynamic overall, before we dive in specifically to where he would go in drafts, but just from the talent perspective?
One of the things in terms of our rankings, we ranked him pretty aggressively in the RotoViz Rookie Guide. I feel very good about that, obviously, as more and more news comes out. Every time we talk about him on Stealing Bananas, Ben is very adamant that he is going to play both, if not mostly offense, which, again, that seems to be the direction now that things are trending. I think because he played so much on defense this past year. And again, because really what we're looking at here is a player who can be a great player on both sides of the ball. He's a great player on both sides of the ball, but it is kind of the both sides of the ball element that makes him so interesting. And so if you limited him again to one side, whether that's offense or defense, in this case, say it is offense, then you are removing a little bit of the value. And I do think that we have a strong enough top 3, 4, arguably even 5. I think that Cam Ward is the other player who, not to say that he really rises, you could certainly argue that the only rising element is that I've had him too low during the process. I think that there are parts of going to Tennessee that are negative. You could certainly argue it would be better to be with Malik Neighbors, for example. It would be better if Tennessee had allowed one of these other teams to trade up and to get him at points during the draft process, not super recently, but they seemed like they were okay taking a weaker armed QB that maybe had the accuracy elements they were looking for or certain types of personality characteristics that they were looking for. And then as they went through the process, they were like, wait, why would we be taking that? When we love Cam Ward's personality, he seems incredibly, polished isn't the right word, but ready to play. Someone who's very engaged in the cerebral side of it as well, and has a cannon and has succeeded in multiple environments. You can't risk passing that up. And so we have questions about their skill positions. We have questions about their head coach. He's probably someone who should have been fired after this last year. And I do think that that's a concern, right? You don't really want to start your NFL career with a head coach who probably should have just been fired. And yet everyone coming around to the evaluation that we have had on him and what the data appears to show, I think that solidifies him up in that top 5 or 6 picks in a super flex draft as well. Even if you're going to say the quarterbacks, as we have said, are often undervalued. It doesn't mean that a star QB coming in you're going to avoid, right? That wouldn't make sense either. So when you think about the running backs up top, when you think about McMillan, and then this journey with Hunter, where the upside is huge, it probably never made sense for him to be as low as he was during so much of the process. We've been above consensus on him the whole way. I do think that we have to be a little bit careful about simply jumping him over almost everyone, because there is a lack of polish there that will have to then be worked through at the NFL level. And as you mentioned, they don't have a quarterback. They also have a situation where Jerry Jeudy really came into his own. And so if that is the 1-2 dynamic, there's not necessarily a gigantic workload or target share that he will simply fall into. Now, having said that,
there is also the part that it's Njoku and Jeudy, and there's not very much else there. There's a big piece of the pie to come in and take if you're ready.
So when you balance those two elements, I think that he moves to the top of whatever you would consider to be sort of the second tier, or if you want to break it into kind of mini tiers, if you want to have GT by himself, then a few little guys would say Hampton, McMillan, if you like Henderson as much as we do, those guys are still going to be there. And it's also interesting because Tyler Warren is such a good prospect, and we know how much it changes the team, probably in a way even that receivers don't, right? You think about the 2 superstars from last year. Certainly if you're in a tight end premium, which not all leagues are, but you'd be hard pressed to want Neighbors over Bowers, even given the fact that Neighbors might be like the wide receiver 2, right, overall.
And it's
So
interesting that you bring up that kind of last year's comparison and having it in hindsight now, because you do mention in the update. I'm lucky enough to have a sneak peek here of it to talk about Hunter as a prototypical neighbors like talent on offense. And you're looking then at the tight end, and if you're playing in tight end premium leagues, you probably still want Bowers at this point in time over neighbors. And it's interesting because I was going to say, if he gets the second pick in the NFL draft, how does draft capital factor into where we would expect him to go then? If the team is adamant about the offensive side of the thing, where should he go in rookie drafts? But it feels like Warren is going to be may still be quite a bargain in rookie drafts this year.
It does seem that way. We've talked quite a bit about how this is sort of a new era. The other thing that we have to sort of mention with Warren is that the tight end group that he was in that included both Brenton Strange, a guy that is generating some buzz with the Jaguars now that Evan Ingram has moved on, also included Theo Johnson, someone who was buzzy right before
Last year.
Yeah, and because of a variety of sort of minor elements, Johnson didn't end up becoming a breakout star last year. He still has a path to be a very interesting player. Again, everything is complicated by the fact that the Giants are the Giants. I don't think that those two guys were not going to have stopped Brock Bowers, right? Bowers did what he did from the first moment he stepped on campus, including just easily pushing to the side other, relatively big NFL talents. But not every player takes the same trajectory. And what Warren did in 2024, the production was so crazy. You don't have to be Brock Bowers. Trey McBride would be fine, right? If you're going to get Trey McBride in the middle of the first round here, then you're going to take that over someone who is probably going to have to manage a couple of different positions as an NFL player. But obviously we don't know that you're going to get Trey McBride either, which is why, some of these questions in the middle of the first round, those draft decisions are going to be challenging.
Yeah. So when we go and look here with the Travis Hunter specific element of it, and this question only came in yesterday. So even since, I mentioned about the news today, and that, obviously that's just one person sharing information, but Jeremiah usually a pretty good source on these things, as I mentioned off the top. But John Paul messages in, where would you guys consider taking Hunter in super flex drafts? He said it feels like a lottery pick, and he mentions at this time we probably won't know until training camp preseason what the team will do with him, and that's not going to help out the fantasy community. I think, Shawn, we're going to know pretty quick, and I think the team is probably going to say they're going to use him on both sides of the ball. I think to the extent that they will use him will probably be kept under wraps, and we're going to have to draft obviously in the next 2 to 3 weeks. But if you're thinking about him from an offensive point of view, the information that has been trickling out over the last kind of I'm going to use a phrase here, Shawn, that I don't know if it always, I think this, when I mentioned this phrase, we always ask this question, but about the last fortnight, for the last 2 weeks. But the news has been very positive for people who want to draft him and have him on their fantasy roster. He mentions the term lottery pick, and you don't usually want lottery picks in the the first 5 picks of your rookie draft, but the upside here is so high that I think that you do need to be willing to take the shots there. What are you thinking in terms of in these super flex drafts as we sit now? And obviously this is a teaser towards your 4-round mock, but what's the spot that you're happy to get him at?
Well, just to give people a window into the article coming out, I do have him up at 106. I'm also involved in a pre-NFL draft, rookie draft, one of the leagues that I do with Scott Barrett, and he went early, right? So I think that if you're interested in him, you're going to have to either have that pick in the 105, 106, 107 range, or you're going to move up to it. I don't think he's going to fall beyond those slots. Maybe even 104 is going to be, after this most recent news, is going to be. I think
you might need
some people are going to like him.
You might need a top 3 pick, Shawn. I think at this point you might need a top 3 pick.
And I think that's where we have a risk of going from
double
trying to too dramatically change the way we were looking at it, because you still, and one of the things when you look at his 2024 season, there is this mix of results where, in the context of someone who is being drafted to play both, and it's going to be a fantastic defensive back, the numbers look really good. And as he develops as a receiver, he's probably going to be really good there as well. You get both things. That's why you take him second overall. If you start to think of him as just a defensive back or just a wide receiver, then he probably doesn't deserve to be the second pick in the NFL draft. And it's also something where, as you're thinking about it from a receiving perspective, I know that McMillan has been really falling for a lot of people. To my mind, somewhat bizarrely. I mean, Travis Hunter probably isn't the quality of receiver prospect that McMillan is. Certainly not at this moment. So, how are you going to deal with that, where you're probably still going to lose him to defense as well? Because we tend to think about this through the lens of, oh, he's this great defensive back and he's going to fight to play offense. Well, if the team is going to select him to play offense, he's also going to fight to play defense, because, again, his whole thing is he's going to play both. Yeah. So I think that we have to be aware of that. I think that the guys that you're looking at to battle with him for your own picks are going to come down to, when you're on the clock, do you need a QB? I went ahead and took Cam Ward, because that team that I was drafting on really did need to address that position. And even though I don't like to draft for position, when you have a pick outside the top 2 or 3, you're not going to get Ginty, you're not going to get McMillan, you're not going to get Hampton. For me, it came down to Ward or Henderson, and Henderson actually fell a number of spots, which I thought was pretty interesting there, with guys like Hunter and Warren jumping him. Do you need that QB? Do you need the tight end, where Warren might be the difference maker for you to really completely change your entire roster? Or can you take best player available? And if you think best player available is Hunter, then you grab him right there.
And I think it's going to add a little bit of, it adds a little bit of nuance. Maybe, people do get hyped post to the draft here with him. If he, goes number 2 to Cleveland with the news that's come out, it just makes some of those picks a little bit more valuable when people are on the clock. I think it might make a fun wrinkle to the drafts here as we move forward. You mentioned, thinking of him as a defensive player or an offensive player. The reality is that he's looking to do both. We had 2 separate questions, Shawn. We don't talk a lot of IDP leagues on the podcast, but we had 2 separate questions about, if he was dual eligible and plays wide receiver and defensive back, basically where should he be going? The question coming in here was from Jason Sander, and he mentions it's a tight end premium league, super flex scoring, some benefits to the quarterback, but he gives the kind of conundrum here that, if he plays wide receiver, then he's probably a mid-round pick at best. If he plays just defensive, he's probably in the same boat. But if he plays both, that he, probably in that scoring system would fit in as the 101. I'm not going to go too much one side of that. I think he's the 101 if you're playing in a league where you get points for him playing on both sides, and he can play both sides. I think it's kind of either him or QB, and I think in this particular setting with his upside, I think he is the 101 in that setting. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, we have a couple of, as you mentioned, IDB questions here, which is
it's interesting because I think he wants to play both. We don't have this every year where people are like looking to play both sides. So I did find that interesting to get it to pop up here.
Yeah, every league may have slightly different rules for how they adjudicate this. It doesn't really matter too much if he's a wide receiver or he's a DB or he's eligible in either spot. If he's going to score the points, then he's the 101. Right? You look through the rules for a lot of the different leagues, and you can see what wide receivers are eligible to score, what defensive backs are eligible to score. They're not necessarily eligible to score in the categories that they're not eligible in. So you just kind of have to understand your league. If you score both the defensive back points and the wide receiver points, and you can put him in either the wide receiver spot or the defensive back spot, that part doesn't matter as much. Just, is he going to score both points? If he's going to score both points, you're
Well,
in
I
there
think in
trying to,
most leagues
like,
as well, I do agree there'll be some leagues that'll be specified, but most leagues, my understanding is a bit like, if a quarterback throws a touchdown but it gets tipped in the air and he catches it and runs it in, he kind of gets both points for that in a lot of leagues. So I think in most scenarios, you're going to set yourself up to get both points. And I think at that point, you have to make them the 101.
yeah, I mean, again, you got to go in and look at your settings, because in at least some of the leagues that I play, you got the offensive scoring, you got the defensive scoring.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily going to score both, even if you played both. It's just not set up that way. But yeah, I mean, you'd be in there trading 4 or 5 first-round picks to get someone who's going to score twice as many points as everybody else. That having an extra starting spot, even if, one of the leagues that I play, Colm, is one that I've been doing a long time with some of the original PFF guys. And I mean, it's a 21 starter league where we have 10 offensive players, 11 defensive players. The scores, tend to be, 250 to 230 and whatnot, just, average scores. Even in that situation, Travis Hunter is going to be the easy 101 that you're going to be like, what can I trade to get him? Because there'd be a lot of scoring.
Moving in now to some more just overall draft related questions for rookie drafts. Shawn, you touched on it a little bit there. And another thing I love with these questions when they come in, this question comes in from Logan. I don't know if it's my pronunciation, Shawn. I don't know if it's the way people like to spell it, but we get a lot of questions coming in for Shawn, S-E-A-N, rather than the S-H-A-W-N. And I really enjoy that. I think it's just
that's the proper Irish spelling.
That is the proper Irish spelling. And I think that's just that they want to make me feel at home here. But this one comes in with that spelling in particular. But it's looking for the sweet spot outside of the 101. There's another question that came in from B.A. Sykes, and it was he's loaded up here at the start of the first round. He is the 101, the 103, the 104, the 105. He's talking about which players is he taking. I think the players that you mentioned there, as we talked through kind of the Hunter Cam Ward scenario, fits for the names that you're probably taking for that part of the question. But we will talk about this more post NFL draft. But as we sit now with where you're mocking these players to go, where are you finding is the sweet spot? Let's say you're either outside of a certain spot, you should be like trying to trade up, or you should be trying to move back into an area of 3 names you expect to be there at let's say it's the 8, 9, 10 spots where you're pretty excited to draft in that range.
Yes, I do think that after the players we talked about, there is a pretty meaningful drop. Judkins is quite interesting as well to me. But then we kind of start getting into guys where I have them ranked dramatically differently than consensus. So one of the things I was sort of discussing with this draft that I'm currently in that's ongoing, a lot of the guys I have ranked in relatively early round 2 made it into round 3. I sent some trade offers out to try and get some of those picks. We're now, continuing to kind of move through and continue to send trade offers, because my round 2 players are going to be round 3 guys in many cases. I don't know that you can count on all of these people falling, but one of the things too that happens on Friday, is that we find out how wrong we are in our assumptions about not necessarily what the guys who are going to go in round 1 are going to have happen to them. Because part of the reason they're in round 1 is that we do understand how the NFL evaluates them, and partly that's simply because they're that good. You get down into even a slightly more nebulous section, and now we can find that we are really far off of where the NFL is. So some of these guys are going to lose a lot of value in the next week. And so players that I'm saying I've got them ranked in round 2, they're probably going to go in round 3, just really load up on the 301, the 302, the 303, the 304. In a week, maybe that won't be as strong an approach because these players have lost value. But one of the things that I've been consistently talking about that is going to continue to be the case, because it almost has to happen in the NFL draft, right? You look at where guys are going right now in FFPC Best Ball at the running back position, and there are players who go in round 17 through 20 who are virtually identical to the players who are going in round 10. And the reason they're going so late is that just as you tend to rank out these rookies, not everybody can go in the same spot. And once you get sort of a community agreement on what the ranking is, the people who are toward the bottom of that are going to fall in drafts because they're just not going to all go in the same round. Well, we're going to have guys who fall in the NFL draft, not because they're in any way worse, but simply because they are going to have to come off the board in some order. Not every team is going to need a running back, and some of the teams are simply going to be looking to hit the guys at the end of tiers. And if they think the tiers are so deep that that means actually using a 6th or 7th round pick on a running back, you're not going to be able to look at it and say this is a 6th round pick or a 7th round pick, and now we're going to move them into round 4 of rookie drafts. We're going to move them completely off the board in best ball once these new tournaments start up. That's what's going to happen. And that's where the value is going to be, right? So you kind of have to balance those two elements where we have the humility of understanding we could be wrong. And some of these guys have fallen because the NFL is not as excited about them, with really grabbing this opportunity of understanding that some of the teams are just savvy enough to say, look, let's take the last guy. We have really high grades on, and some of the teams, because they need other positions as well,
trying to balance it.
Yeah, and they're going to
the best of both worlds.
Right. And so when you think about how it's a little bit different if you're thinking about an actual NFL draft than if you're thinking about creating a portfolio of fantasy picks, where if you miss on someone in a fantasy draft, you're like, okay, well, let's just do their draft. The NFL draft is like, you're going to get the guys that you picked. And yet one of the things that I think is frustrating about ADP at this point is that you don't see a lot of huge fallers because someone's just going to want to take the ADP value. You don't have that sense of uncertainty from the perspective of like, what's the big Christmas present going to be? Like, who's going to be the big faller? Where NFL teams can look at this, and I mean, if you actually think that the guy you have ranked the highest out of, not the top 3 or 4 guys, but of this 20-player group, if you think that the guy that you have ranked 8th is going to fall to 18th, and you think that because of this relative replaceability of running back production, the fungibility of talent, all of that it's worth taking that risk, I mean, you're going to be looking at some of these teams taking guys at the very end where, and some of them may even come out and say it, some of them are probably going to keep it closer to the vest, where, they got, the player they had ranked number 7, number 8 at running back late on day 3.
Yeah, and they're going to be pretty excited about that. A little bit like you're kind of hinting at it if we're doing a fantasy draft, but sometimes you're like, I think this guy's going to go 2 rounds after I make this pick, so I can try and do it in a little bit of a different direction and get kind of the 2 guys that you want at 2 separate picks. The last question for today, Shawn, comes in from Zach, and he's using the RotoViz Rookie Guide. He messaged via X to say his tight end premium Superflex Dynasty Draft is on Wednesday before the NFL draft. How would you modify your rookie draft ranks for the top 25 players based on expected draft capital now? So you're obviously having to follow the news. You're making the decisions. You're not going to know where these players have landed, and to be able to make those decisions. You mentioned about, the tiers and how to play that off. For example, the draft you're doing with Scott Barrett, what are some of the differences that you would kind of add in the nuances, I guess, before the NFL draft?
Yeah, it depends a little bit on the team that you have built and your risk profile. I think that you can either take a more conservative approach where before the draft, you're really focusing on players that you think are unlikely to have an extremely wide range. If you have some favorites where you think they could fall, into the 6th or 7th round, then you're going to be less likely maybe to go ahead and make that pick early, unless, and by make the pick early, I simply mean, you say the 202, 203 on them. The other thing you can do, though, is try and maneuver within the draft to get a lot of picks that maybe are risky picks. And so you move from round 2 into round 3. Once we have a lot of information, that moving back is going to potentially be a little bit less successful because that new information does lock some guys in. Right now, if you move a bunch of your picks into round 3 for a draft that's going to happen, say, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday morning, what have you, I think that you're going to end up being able to select a lot of your guys at big discounts. And so that would be something you could do. So you can either play it safe or you can move back and play it very aggressively. One of the things that I would note for our rookie guide of subscribers is that the 3rd volume will be out very shortly after the NFL draft. And then also the articles I've been referencing, both the one that I originally put out and then the updated piece, should be available for you when you draft on Wednesday. That will have more updated information than the rookie guide volume 2, which came out after the combine. That is a good version. I definitely would encourage people to buy it if you're trying to get the
if you're going to get the
full sense of all the players.
Yeah, but if you're going to get the post NFL draft edition, you're going to buy that. Buy it now because you get to get the pre-draft edition as well. All 3 editions come along with it.
Sure. So put those together.
So definitely, Shawn, the best answer is if you're trying to do your draft pre-NFL draft is to go to rotoviz.com and read Shawn's updated 4-round mock. That'll kind of give a little bit more clarity to that expected draft capital as well.
Yeah, and I think that we have to be a little bit careful about the expected draft capital, but certainly if you feel like you're really tuned in and you know where guys are going to go, then
and there will be some fallers or players ahead of ADP, but generally within 20 picks, you're nearly a round of variance then to deal with.
Yeah, so
I think the running backs, like you were kind of talking about there, is going to be the one area where it's going to be very interesting to see where they land over the next couple of days. Because I agree that part that you're talking about, if you've the RB10 versus the RB20 and the teams have them all jumbled up, like there's no doubt some of those guys are going to slide in the draft, and you may then move into your post NFL draft, rookie drafts, and those guys could, I think, be significant values based on people's expectation of the draft capital versus how the team was playing it, like you mentioned a moment ago.
Yeah, and I think the places where we're most likely to see draft capital being different than the rankings are going to be on guys who, I mean, you suspect will be overdrafted, right? So Matthew Golden, Amika Ibuka. Colson Loveland is a little bit different type of dynamic. I did move him up considerably in this most recent update. He's going to be drafted aggressively, it appears. Whether or not that's too aggressively is a little bit of a different question. It was interesting, as we did our show with Scott, he was very high on him. I don't think it's giving anything away to say that he and Danny, who co-run their team in that league, they did select him in the first round. You're probably going to be fine if you use kind of that late-ish first round pick on Loveland. So you have some of those guys locked in. Obviously, you appear to have Cam Ward locked in. We have more information about Travis Hunter. Outside of the players who are going to go in the first round, I do think that things are still very much up in the air. This is a deep and interesting wide receiver group. I think that how teams are using receivers, I think this most recent 5 or 6 years in college football is so different because college football has changed so much that some of the things we think that we know are going to be a little bit less relevant. I guess I'm kind of working around to saying I don't think it's a great class, which you do occasionally hear people talk about it being an interesting and deep class. If you're talking about drafting a receiver late on day 3, then I think this is an interesting class because there are a lot of really fast guys who you can, as each individual team does their evaluation, watches these players play, meets with them, you're going to have some people late that based on your particular team needs, the way your own offense works, based on meetings where you get a sense of the player's personality and how you think that he will work with your coaches to potentially make a jump. And then out of the big group of players who's really, really athletic, you're going to have someone that excites you. That's a little bit different than having like day 2 where rounds 2 and 3, there are going to be a lot of players taken who probably are reaches at that point. And then certainly it looks like Golden and Ibuka will be reaches. Now, again, whether or not that means that they flame out or that they're simply glorified role players is a different thing, right? Having those guys be overrated doesn't mean that they won't be valuable NFL players. And it doesn't even mean that they won't end up being overall wide receiver ones, right? Because what you've done to this point, and one of the reasons why the draft is fun, and one of the reasons why there is still a very real role for people who are doing the film and making decisions either more that way or more aspirationally, or however you want to look at it, is that these guys are not tied to the production in a way that is completely deterministic. We're talking about probabilities, and you can talk all day long about the profiles for Golden and Ibuka not really matching up to where they're being projected. Either of them could still be a very, very good NFL player.
So we are stepping closer each second, obviously, that goes by to the NFL draft. We will be back to talk a little bit more about it. We might even get some of Shawn's dream landing spots for his favorite players here. We will have that edition coming out on Wednesday, so make sure you are subscribed to the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed to get those once they're available. We'll have some information on that about potential upcoming listener league drafts as well, so do come and check out that edition. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on social media at Overtime Ireland. You can check out all of Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com, including that 4-round mock draft. And until we are back, have a good one.